Hello, my name's Roisin, and I don't think I've read as many classics as I think I have. Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. So today we're talking about classics. This video was inspired by two booktubers that I watch. First was Charlotte from Queenie Reads, who I think around Christmas did this video. It was a while ago. She received one of those scratch off posters where you scratch off the book if you've read it, and it was for classics, and it was 100 classics, and she was talking about whether she'd read them or not and her thoughts, etc, etc. And I thought, oh, that would be a fun video, except I don't have one of those posters and I'm not in need of one. I don't need to acquire more things. So recently Grace from GK Reads did this as well with the same list that I'm going to go through now, the Penguin 100 Classics, and it reminded me that this was a video that I wanted to film because, if you don't know, I'm trying to read 30 new to me classics before I turn 30 in next October. And so I thought it would be an interesting idea to look back and see how many classics I have actually read already. So I've got a list of 100 here, and because this might be a long video, I am going to stop rambling, get straight into it. The first one on this list is Pride and Prejudice. Yes, I have read Pride and Prejudice, as you probably know, because most people who watch this have probably seen my video about Pride and Prejudice in defence of Mrs. Bennet, which I will leave in the cards if you haven't seen it. Then next is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Yes, I definitely read this. I was a teenager. I remember reading it. I remember enjoying it, but I don't have like quite detailed in-depth feelings about this because I know there's a lot of talk about like it's interesting that one of the most famous books about the civil rights era is written by a white woman, etc, etc. So I have read it, but I don't have many thoughts about it. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald I also read as a teenager, and similarly I don't know how I would feel about it if I read it now. I remember thinking the writing was really beautiful, but I recently read, last year I read another F. Scott Fitzgerald and really didn't like it, and so I don't know if my feelings would be changed now, knowing like you stole most of his work from Zelda, etc, etc, so I don't know how I'd feel about it. 4 is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which I have a copy of downstairs, which I bought in December this year. My copy is stunning. I'll try and put a picture up of it here. So it's one that's definitely on my list, one that I want to read in my 30 classics before 30, because one of the things I'm trying to do is read more diverse classics, like not just classics written by white English men. And so Gabriel Garcia Marquez being like the founding father of magical realism and one of the most famous Latin American writers, I feel like definitely should be on my list. Then we have In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This one's non-fiction, I believe, a true crime, which I have not read. I've read Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote and I really enjoyed it, but I haven't read In Cold Blood. Next is Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, which I think I, again, have on my shelf somewhere. We're trying to be rapid fire, and so there's no point searching for it, but I do have that somewhere. I have read Jane Eyre, which might come up later, so I feel like I need to read Wide Sargasso Sea because I know that this is like a feminist post-colonial reading of Jane Eyre. Didn't love Jane Eyre, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley is number 7. That one I read last year. Again, didn't love. I'm not a huge like dystopian reader anyway. This one I know is about like information overload and how we'll be happily oblivious to things going on, and I think that is an interesting perspective because it does seem very relevant to today. I don't know when corduroy shorts became sexy. That was a weird descriptor in it, but I also did feel like it was a very sexist book. Like it was very much interesting in the way that it explored human psyche, but women were just sex objects and had no opinions and would, when they had complete birth control and freedom to sexual freedom, they would become crazy depressed because they couldn't have children, and children are what women need. I don't know, I just felt like it was a bit reductive in that section. Number 8 is I Capture the Castle, which is one of my favourite books of all time. I love I Capture the Castle. I read it so many times as a teenager. I love the film with Romola Garai and Henry Cavill and Bill Nighy. I loved that film so much, and I loved that book as well. I remember it said, "I'm 17, I'm no beauty, but have a neatish face." And that was like, I was like, yeah, that's how I feel about myself. Number 9 here is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which I've mentioned already. Yes, I have read Jane Eyre. I didn't love it. I didn't love it when I read it. I've heard people say you're either a Wuthering Heights person or a Jane Eyre person. I don't know how true that is. But again, I read Jane Eyre when I was a teenager, so I don't know if I'd find more in it now, because I was definitely much more into like ballsy, fiery women and women who were like a bit chill, a bit more like godly, kind of put me off quite a lot. And then also Rochester's just like a terrible person. Like Heathcliff is a terrible person, but Heathcliff is in the text a terrible person, like they describe him as a vampire and stuff like that, whereas Rochester is a terrible person but kind of a romantic hero. So I don't really like it for that reason. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This one I should be able to find. It's red. This one I own. I tried to read it last year. I didn't get very far, unfortunately. This has some of the tiniest writing, which is off-putting, as well as being, you know, thick Russian classic about philosophy, pretty sure. A journey into the criminal mind, a police thriller, and a philosophical meditation on morality and redemption. So yeah, those things kind of make me nervous of it. And also, I kind of wanted to listen to it on audio. I love listening to classics on audio, but I couldn't find this translation on audio. I could only find an older translation, and lots of people like slagging off that translation. That was the only one I could find on audio. I think the reason it's on audio is because that translation is in public domain, whereas this translation is not. So maybe I'll actually just pay for the audiobook of that translation. Number 11 is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I wouldn't consider a classic, but I guess it's a modern classic. It's as old as me, so it's not exactly that old in terms of books. I mean, I'm not that old, am I? I love that book. Secret History is a book that I really, really enjoyed. I have classics degree, so being like kind of nerdy and elitist about classics and like taking the piss out of nerdy, elitist, classicist people from the upper classes, which I am not and was interesting. The university I went to is a fairly posh university. Classics is a fairly posh subject. Yeah, I felt like I enjoyed that, and then also it's beautifully written. It's very satirical and comedic. I think that a lot of the people are like, yeah, I don't like this because the characters are super pretentious, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of the point. You're laughing at the pretentiousness, but I guess even if it's a satire, sometimes those things can get on your nerves, but it didn't for me in The Secret History. Next, The Call of the Wild by Jack London is one that I don't think I would ever read. I know it's about a dog, and it just reminds me of that New Girl episode where when he tries to send the dog away. That's my thing I remember about this. I feel like that's a very American classic, which is not something I have a huge amount of experience with. I don't really know enough about it to know if I'd want to read it. Then there's The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. John Wyndham obviously is very famous for science fiction. This is a science fiction dystopia written in the wake of the Second World War. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to read that. Not a science fiction reader. Really have a strong aversion to dystopian fiction now. I feel like I've read some of it and it just all seems the same, and I feel like maybe this would feel the same, but is like where it all comes from. I didn't like The War of the Worlds, you know. I feel that's kind of the genre and the place I'd put it in, and since I didn't like them, I'm not sure I want to read this. Persuasion by Jane Austen is number 14. Potentially my favourite Jane Austen. Hard to say. I feel like I like all of them, and at different times of your life you go through a different liking of them, but I feel like Persuasion is the most pure romantic of the novels. Like you still have the satire of like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility and all of that, and Emma, but it feels like this one's the most like pure yearning, longing, nostalgia, kind of melancholy edge of romance. Like I feel like this is closer to the Joe Wright Pride and Prejudice, whereas the BBC Pride and Prejudice is close to Pride and Prejudice, because Pride and Prejudice is much more on the satire side of things, and this more on that like romantic, longing looks kind of side. So I really enjoy it for that. Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I don't know how much I want to read about whale penises. So I'm not sure this is something that I want to read. I don't know, I feel really on the fence about it because some people really love it, but it is, I know, like a lot about whale hunting and like how you break down a whale after you've hunted it and stuff like that, which I just feel bored just thinking about it. So I don't know if I want to read that. Although I do enjoy, and I only know this because of Gilmore Girls, in which Rory is reading Moby Dick, that it mentions that sometimes he feels like when he's feeling down and angry at the world, when he's walking around the world and he feels like knocking people's hats off, he must take to the sea. And sometimes I know what that feeling is, that feeling of wanting to knock people's hats off. 16 is The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I remember really liking this when I read it as a child. I never read any of the others though. I also had the BBC radio play adaptation on audio tape, which I used to listen to over and over again, and holds strong nostalgia feelings for me. It's one of those ones where it's like, oh, I don't remember feeling like it was really Jesus heavy, but I know now that it is really Jesus heavy, and that makes me feel like, would I want to share it with my children? Not because there's anything wrong with being Christian, but because come to that at an older age, so that it's a decision of their own and not something that they've been indoctrinated into. Anyway, that's an entirely different discussion. Number 17, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf is a writer that I know I need to read, but one that I never ever have. She's definitely one that I feel like I should have read, considering who I am. Like, it feels like one of those things that kind of aligns with, you would have expected me to have read it, but I haven't. And I know that she's like very much stream of consciousness and that sort of thing, but her books tend to be fairly short. So I feel like I could make a stab at it, but I'm really kind of unsure because I don't know how I feel about stream of consciousness writing. Like, it's not something I have a huge experience with, and I know it's very much like a Marmite thing. The number 18 is The Death of the Heart by Elizabeth Bowen. I have never heard of this before. This is the story of 16-year-old Portia, who's set to live with her aunt in London after her mother's death. There she falls for the attractive cad Eddie, a devastating exploration of adolescent love and innocence betrayed. Nope, never heard of it, so I actually have no idea whether I'd want to read that or not. Number 19, Tales of the D'Urbervilles. I have read this. I am by Thomas Hardy. I really, really loved this novel. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. My mum hates Hardy, and so I was expecting to not enjoy it because there are long descriptions of the countryside, but I thought it was a really sympathetic portrayal of a woman's experience in that time, considering especially it was written by a man. And it was also, I really enjoyed the descriptions of rural poverty and the idea of what it would have been like to be in rural times in Victorian era, because I know there's a lot of like idealization of the past as a part of the British psyche, and particularly like because of Dickens and the prevalence of Dickens and the prevalence of BBC adaptations of Dickens, people know that like it was rough to live in the city and be in the workhouse and that sort of thing. But I feel like countryside Victorian is kind of idolised, and Tales of the D'Urbervilles really showed the extremeness of the poverty and the precarity in which people lived, and I really felt I enjoyed that aspect of it. Number 20 is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read this last year and I didn't love it. I don't know, again, as I mentioned, I'm not a huge sci-fi reader, I'm not a huge horror reader, so those things don't really appeal to me about it anyway. I felt like it was a lot of a long philosophizing, is that a word? Speeches, where these three men who all sound exactly the same, and I kept getting confused as to which part I was in, talk about their ideas and philosophy rather than the actual, like, the plot. It was just a lot of men's ideas, and I didn't really get on with it as much as I'd hoped. Number 21 is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This was one of the ones that was on my A-level reading list when I was studying Russia from 1886, I don't know, from the emancipation of the serfs until the death of Stalin. And this was one of the ones that was on our list of like, maybe read this fiction and it might give you some ideas over the summer. This one was like written during the reign of Stalin. I know it's like really weird and surreal, and my friend who tried to read it really didn't get on with it for that reason. So I don't know if I would like it. The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley is another one that I've never heard of, although I really like that cover, so potentially I could read it for that reason. A moving exploration of a young boy's loss of innocence and a critical view of the society at the end of the Victorian era. Nothing to say on that. Then we have 23, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. I have not read this. I have seen the film, though. My dad gave me this book. Actually, it's one of my dad's favourites, and he gave it to me, but I never read it. About a psychiatric ward in Oregon in, I think, the 50s. I'd be interested to hear some people's thoughts on the representation of race and the particularly Indigenous people in this book, because I'm not an expert on that, but it doesn't seem like it is going to be particularly good. 24 is 1984 by George Orwell. I've never read 1984 by George Orwell, but as I said, dystopian fiction, not really my thing, so I don't know if I will read it, but I kind of feel like I should read it. I know that lots of people are misattributing 1984 when they talk about it online, like saying this is Orwellian, and it's like, that's not what that means, but I haven't actually read it, so I can't like claim anything. Number 25 is Bundenbrooks by Thomas Mann. I've heard of Thomas Mann, I have not heard of Bundenbrooks. Semi-autobiographical family epic about the slow decline of wealthy and highly esteemed merchant family in northern Germany. That would be interesting because the slow decline of aristocratic families is definitely a theme of late 19th and early 20th century classics, but this would be from a different perspective as Thomas Mann is German, so perhaps that would be an interesting one. Number 26 is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. not read this one. Read Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, but I've not read The Grapes of Wrath. But my friend Lucy has read it when we were teenagers and absolutely loved it, said it was devastatingly beautiful. So it is one that's kind of on my radar as one I would probably read. I'm guessing it's about the Great Depression, because that's what Steinbeck tended to write about. Beloved by Toni Morrison is another one that I haven't read, but is incredibly famous and is one that's on my radar to try and read before I'm 30. The story of a former Kentucky slave haunted by the trauma of her past life, and it won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, and it's a historical fiction classic, and as you know, I read a lot of historical fiction anyway, so there's a good chance that I would enjoy it for that reason, although it sounds like it's quite difficult to read, quite experimental, so I'm intrigued but unsure. Number 28, The Code of the Woosters by P.G. Wodehouse. No, I have not read any Wodehouse. I have seen the Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry Wodehouse. It was on like repeats when I was a child, but I haven't read it, although I know lots of people love them, particularly Taylor from The Lass in Linen loves them, but I'm not sure whether I would read this or not. I'm not sure how I would feel. Number 29, Dracula by Bram Stoker. Another one I haven't read, but I did intend to read because I was supposed to be going to Whitby in February, which obviously didn't happen because we were in lockdown, but hopefully I'm intending to keep this for when I do get to go to Whitby, because Whitby Abbey is what Dracula's castle is based off, so I kind of want to read it there because I know that the castle and place is really important in Dracula. So number 30 is The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, my dad read these to me actually when we were kids. My dad read them aloud to us, but we didn't get through the third one. I feel like it's heavy going for kids and I'm not a high fantasy person anyway. 31, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I may have read this, I may not have read this, I can't quite remember. I know I tried to read it as a child, I know I was reading it again when I was like 14 or 15 as a teenager, but I don't have any memory of the actual story aside from Huck painting a fence, so I don't really know. I don't really know if it was my style, but maybe I'd have to try and read it again. 32 is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I've read some Dickens as a teenager and didn't like it, and so I thought I don't get on with Charles Dickens, but last year I read David Copperfield, really enjoyed it, thought it was quite funny, very repetitive, but since I spread it out over so long, like it took me 18 months to read that book, I think that worked in its favour, so I might be willing to try and read very, very slowly another Dickens in the future. Catch-22 by Joseph Heller is one that I haven't read. I know it's about war, is it? And I know it's a satire. Is it dystopian? I don't really know very much about it. But it's one that's like in the zeitgeist, like that's a catch-22 situation. So I don't know. I'm kind of wary of it because it's like that mid-century misogynist time period, but I don't know if that's necessarily true of this work. It's just that a lot of American male writers from the 1950s and 60s I'm put off of because of the way that they write. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I have seen the film and I have tried to read this, but I didn't get very far. But I don't know if that's like, I was just not in the mood for it, but it's definitely one that I want to read because I enjoyed the film so much and it's like beautiful, slow moving. And I kind of have it in the same box as Anna Karenina in my head, but I don't know if that's the correct box because I haven't actually read either of those. 35 is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which I read this year and I really, really enjoyed that book. There's so much to it, so much packed into such a short space of time, but I did read it recently, I think in a vlog, so I'll leave it up there if I've got it. Number 36 is Middlemarch by George Eliot. No, I have not read any George Eliot. Again, another one that I feel like I should have read, but I haven't. They're huge though, they're like chunky doorstop books, and so I feel like maybe I should read it. Book is considered by many the greatest Victorian novel. And it's a historical fiction as well because it's set 40 years before it was published, so interesting but not sure. Number 37, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, another one that's kind of more modern than classic in my opinion. I don't know if I would read this. Salman Rushdie is obviously a very controversial figure, kind of a misogynist again, so that's one of the things that kind of puts me off. But again, the fact that it's like been described as like really well written and visceral, which is a thing that I love in books, maybe I'd have to give it a try. 38, The Iliad by Homer. No. Have a classics degree, as I mentioned, have not read The Iliad by Homer because book 2, the book of ships, the list of the ships and who's on the ship and who they're related to, could not get past it, could not. I know I should probably just skip it and read the rest, but the Odyssey's better anyway, so Number 39, Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. Another one that I feel like I should have read. Satirical reflection on society. Love that. Large cast of characters you can't help but root for throughout the Napoleonic Wars. And Becky Sharp is one of the greatest female lead characters in English literature. So I really feel like I should have read it, but no, Vanity Fair is not one I've read or really know anyone who's read. 40, Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. I love this book. One of my favourite books. I love the writing. I love the characters. So beautiful. So yes, I have read that. 41, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Also read that. Wish I hadn't. One of those mid-century misogynists that makes me wish that puts me off other writers from the same period. Dull, boring, misogynistic, gross. 42, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Again, another one that I might have read, but I can't quite remember. I feel like I might have read this as a child, but I have no real memory of the book. So I don't know if this is one that I would reread, having possibly read it, possibly not. Number 43, The Miller on the Floss by George Eliot again. I've already said I've not read any George Eliot. I feel like I should pick one and read it and then decide whether I like it or like her writing or not to continue. 44, Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. I've heard a lot about Trollope and I'm kind of intrigued. Like, I hadn't heard much about Trollope's writing until more recently. All of a sudden I've heard about it recently and people have been really praising it as like excellent Victorian novels. And so it's made me more intrigued to read it, but no, I haven't. 45, Another Country by James Baldwin. No, I haven't read that either. I have read If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin and I really loved it, loved his writing, loved his characters, so I do think I want to read some more of his other work. Some that are more like, Another Country has more to do with like sexuality, bisexuality and interracial couples and stuff, so I'd be interested in reading that as well. Number 46, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. No, I haven't read it. Yes, I do own it. That one might be downstairs. I own it because on Tumblr, when I was on Tumblr, so I must have been like 15, people were talking about it all the time and really loved it, and so I was intrigued by that, but no, I haven't read it. Sorry, Charlotte. I feel like I should because I own it and it's the only Penguin cloth bound I own, but I'm also kind of put off by the like pages and pages about the Parisian sewer system. It's like Moby Dick. It's the same kind of feeling. 47, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. Definitely read that as a child. I think I've read most of Roald Dahl as a child and was in love with his work. Number 48, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is the Stay Gold Ponyboy book. I haven't read this. I feel like this is one of those very American books that didn't quite make it across the pond and that like Americans have to read in high school, but is not one that is very well known here. The original YA novel. I don't read many YA novels, so I don't know if I'll go back and read it. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. That one I feel like I do want to read because I've heard that it's so funny, and that makes me really intrigued. But again, big doorstop books. Why in the Victorian times were people writing such huge books? It's supposed to be really epic and funny, and so that's kind of made me intrigued to read it. Number 50, Ulysses by James Joyce. Maybe not. I've read The Dubliners by James Joyce, which I did enjoy, but that's a collection of short stories. I know that this is like so experimental, like not as bad as Finnegan's Wake. Use of inner monologue, stream of consciousness technique. I feel like I need to get a better hand on whether I'm whether I can read stream of consciousness or not before I get to this. I'm 25 minutes into filming and I'm only halfway through this list. Right. East of Eden by John Steinbeck. No, not read. I said I'd only read one John Steinbeck. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Haven't read any Dostoevsky yet. I have a kind of interest in Russian literature because I studied Russian at school and studied the Russian Revolution in school, so I feel like I should know more about Russian culture. I've read Chekhov, but I think that's about it. So it is on my list, but I don't know. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Yes, I have read Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I think that it is really beautifully written. It is like such a takedown of the sexualization of children in our media, and I think that the fact that the film actually went to make the sexualization of children stronger than it is in the book, it's kind of indicative of what Nabokov's point was. So I think that it's an uncomfortable read, but on purpose, and I think he does such a good job of the unreliable narrator. Like, it's the perfect example of an unreliable narrator. The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Yes, I read this when I was a child. I loved this as I was a child. Would be interested to read it now in terms of, is it more like a post-colonial book, especially at the beginning of that book. I feel like there's lots of colonial overtones. That would be interesting. The Scoop by Evelyn Waugh. No, I've only read Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, but I love the writing so much that I probably would want to read more of his work. 56, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. As I mentioned, I've only read David Copperfield. Tale of Two Cities, though, is a historical fiction about the French Revolution, so perhaps I would like to read that, particularly in relation to the fact that I've recently read Hilary Mantel's A Place of Greater Safety. I would be interested to see how much inspiration she took from Dickens's work, as well as obviously all of the historical. Number 57, Diary of a Nobody by George Grossmith and Whedon Grossmith. I have never heard of this book, so I don't know, but I'm not sure. It says it's a riotously funny novel, which is something that I like in classics, something with a bit of comedy and humour, but I need to hear what other people think of it because I've heard nothing about it. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, much in the same vein as the other Russians that I've mentioned. The Betrothed by Alessandro Mazzioni. Never heard of it, but Italian classic is something that I would be interested to read. I've not read very much Italian fiction at all, and I studied Italian at university, so I feel like I should. Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I already mentioned how I feel about Virginia Woolf. Orlando, I know, is about gender and like someone who changes their gender at will, which sounds like a really interesting concept. Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. No, I'm not going to read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Are you crazy? I am a leftist. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Like I already mentioned, I've read The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells and I didn't love it, so I don't know if I would read The Time Machine. A Metaphor for the Fractured Society that we still live in today. I don't know, I feel like it would be boring. Like The War of the Worlds was boring. So The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I don't think I'm going to read this. It's non-fiction again. I want to read some Chinese classics, but I feel like Sun Tzu is overdone. The Forsyte Saga by John Goldsworthy. I know that this was on television when I was a child, an adaptation of this, but this is a multi-generational saga that chronicles the Forsyte family's fortunes and downfalls as they live through dramatic social change from the straight-laced Victorian era to the Roaring Twenties. So decline of the upper classes, as I mentioned, already seems to be such a big theme. I'm not sure if I would like the Forsyte Saga or not, because again, it's one that I don't know anyone who's read. Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. I've never heard of this book, but I've talked about Steinbeck before. This seems like it's like memoir or non-fiction, which sounds like it would be interesting, but it is a road trip book, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. I have not heard of this book, although I have heard of Henry Miller. Banned in the US and the UK for 30 years for being too pornographic. 1930s Paris. I don't know, maybe, potentially. It sounds interesting, but I'd have to hear what someone else thought of it who has a similar taste to me, because it seems like it could go either way and be funny and like poignant, or it could be just sexist. Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence. I have not read any D.H. Lawrence. I know that he wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover, and like a lot of his books got banned or censored for the sexuality in them. I'd be interested to read them for that reason, but I don't have any particular like connection with him. Staying On by Paul Scott. I have not heard of this. Staying On won the Booker Prize in 1977, and I have enjoyed most Booker Prize winners that I've read. It gives us a unique insight into life after the end of British rule in India. I feel like I'd be more intrigued to read that from an Indian perspective, although since this has such high praise, maybe it would be interesting as well. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. I think I read this as a child, but it's another one that I don't have a huge memory of the plot or what goes on in it. My Antonia by Willa Cather. I've heard of this, but I don't know very much about it. A Great Plains trilogy, which was praised for bringing the American West back to life. I don't have a huge interest in most American classics. I don't know what it is. I just don't feel hugely drawn to them. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. As I mentioned earlier about Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights or one or the other, I'm a Wuthering Heights person. I have made a video about that as well, about why it is a romance novel. And so yes, I've really enjoyed it. I've read it about 4 times now, so aside from Austen, it's probably the classic that I have read the most. Perfume by Patrick Suskind, another one I own but haven't read. 1985 though, is this a classic? What counts as a classic? How old does it have to be a classic? Because I feel like 1985 is not a proper classic. War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Same as all the other Russians, but I feel like War and Peace is one that I would like to read because I've watched the BBC miniseries and I did enjoy it. One of them, I think War and Peace, my Simon Hazel on Instagram has described as being like a soap opera, and now would be commercial fiction were it published today, which I think makes it sound a lot more accessible. Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham. I've heard of Somerset Maugham. I know he was a queer writer and a lot of what he wrote was about like being queer. This is considered to be some of his most autobiographical works. It's kind of auto-fiction. Haven't heard anything about the plot or anything, and I don't know anyone who's read it. Bleak House by Charles Dickens. I've already mentioned how I feel about Dickens. Lost Illusions by Henri de Balzac. French classics, again, one that I feel like I should have read because I studied French at school for 8 years, and so I feel like I should get into French classics. I don't know very much about it. It's one of those things where I feel like you learn about the classics of your own country far more than anyone else. Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. Not read any Kurt Vonnegut, and if I were to read Kurt Vonnegut, I think I would start with Slaughterhouse-Five. Satires, surrealism, sci-fi. I just don't read sci-fi, so I don't feel particularly drawn to this. Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, I have read. Good story. I prefer the Muppets version. Silas Marner by George Eliot. Again, as I said, haven't read any George Eliot, and I think I would start with Middlemarch were I to do so. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I think if I were to read a Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway is the one that I would start with. I think that's 3 Virginia Woolfs on here now. Yeah, I think I would start with that one. Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Yes, I have read Little Women and Good Wives and Little Men. I don't think I got as far as Joe's Boys. Little Women and Good Wives, though, are the best ones. There's no point continuing. I don't think any of the others are particularly good. Love this story. Love all of the film adaptations. The Sea by Iris Murdoch. Another one that I feel like I should read. Won the Booker Prize in '78. Is a 70s book. Really a classic. One of the most impressive pieces of writing I've ever read. So I feel like, yes, I would like to read this one at some point. The Godfather by Mario Puzo. Obviously, what the film is based on. I haven't seen the film either, I know, don't kill me. It is my dad's favourite film, potentially, or Goodfellas. He just loves New York gangsters and he thinks he looks like Al Pacino. He doesn't. He looks like Harry Dean Stanton. Anyway, I don't know how I feel about this one. I did write an essay about it. Well, kind of related to it when I was doing my masters, but I don't know. I don't really feel particularly drawn to it. The Castle by Franz Kafka. I read Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, but I haven't read anything else. The Castle is a nightmarish reach into the autocratic world. Conundrums, confusions, iciness, and moral fog. I mean, you could potentially persuade me to read this, but currently I'm too scared of it. I, Claudius by Robert Graves. Again, I have a classics degree, so I feel like I should have read some of these, like, modern adaptations of classics. No, I have not. I know everybody loves it, and it was made into a TV series, I think. I don't really know anything about it. Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Yes, I think I read that as a child, I think. Another one of those ones that I have, like, this memory of knowing the story. There's the Disney film, but I don't know if I actually read it. And Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, 1980. Again, a medievalist protagonist encounters a series of misadventures in a comedic exploration of the human condition. It makes me laugh. So again, like a funny one, but I'm really not sure. You'd have to try and convince me to read that one because I don't feel any particular draw to it. The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham. I already talked about Somerset Maugham. Lark Christ Candlefoot by Flora Thompson. I watched the BBC adaptation. Very nice, very cosy, but nothing in it made me really want to read the book. It just feels like kind of, it could be a comfort cozy book, but I don't need any more comfort cozy classics. Like I would rather read I Captured the Castle. The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. I've talked about Thomas Hardy. I don't know, I've not heard much about this one though. I think if I'm going to read another Hardy, I would start with Far From the Madding Crowd. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I've also already talked about how I feel about James Joyce. So yeah, again, this one is quite intimidating to me. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. No, thank you. I don't want to read that. I feel like he was coming from a good place, but it's still a really super colonialist read, and I don't particularly have much desire to read that. I feel like I'd have to be studying it in order to get like an actual reason for reading it, like an actual enjoyment out of it. I don't think I could just read it for pleasure. North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, I absolutely love, and I urge you to read if you love Pride and Prejudice and want to learn about the beginnings of the labour movement in England, because this novel manages to combine both those things, which sound really disparate, but it's very, very good. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, 1985. Is it a classic? I have read it. I studied it when I was doing dystopian fiction for my A-levels. Maybe that's what put me off dystopian fiction. I remember liking it, being intrigued by it, but also being a little bored by it, but I know that's kind of the point. It's about the mundanity of tyranny. But I definitely have no drive to read the Testaments or to read it again, particularly. Suite Française by Irene Nemirovsky. 2004! No! But it's about life and death in occupied France. I've talked before about how I feel about World War II fiction. It really is off-putting to me. I feel like a lot of the time it's like glamorized and romanticized and used as part of a imperialist propaganda. So I'm not sure about that. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn is a Russian that I do actually really want to read. Like, I feel it is intimidating, but because Solzhenitsyn was actually sent to the Gulag, I feel like there is a lot of important stuff in his work, so I definitely want to read that. What a Carve Up by Jonathan Coe. Never heard of it. 1994. Again, For me, when I'm reading these 30 classics before I'm 30, it has to be written before 1960, so those ones don't really count. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. My mum bought this one for my brother, but no, I have no interest. White Nights by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a short story divided into 6 sections. I think I'd probably go with Crime and Punishment first. And Hard Times by Dickens. As I said, you already know how I feel about Dickens. Yes, I'm going to try another one soon. Wow. Okay, this video was way longer than I intended it for it to be, and I'm sorry if we kind of went at an incredible clip for the second half of those books. If there are any of those that you think that I would like, please let me know in the comments down below which ones you would encourage me to read. I am trying to read 30 classics before I'm 30, so I definitely have some of these that I need to add to my list. Thank you for watching. If you've stayed here all the way to the end, thank you, I love you. Please leave a crown in the comments so I know that you made it this far, because this was an epic video. Please remember to like this video if you did like it, and to subscribe. I put out new videos 3 days a week, so I will be back again very, very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!